She sat alone beneath the glitter of chandeliers in Glendale, Arizona, invisible to the crowd, until a stranger's shadow fell across her table, his voice urgent, slightly trembling with secrets. "Pretend like you are mine tonight, before they destroy me."
Hello, if you're ready to hear the whole story, click subscribe and tap the notification bell. Type in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as touching as this one, or maybe even crazier. And you don't want to miss it. Now let's begin.
The night had barely begun, yet Elara Vance already felt the weight of it pressing on her shoulders like an ill-fitted dress. Glendale, Arizona had been her hometown all her life, but stepping into the sprawling villa on the city's desert edge made her feel like a tourist in someone else's world. The Hale estate, every corner drenched in golden light, crystal chandeliers and champagne towers, was a stage for people who thrived on being noticed. She, however, was an expert at being invisible. Her invitation hadn't been direct. She'd come as a tag-along with her cousin, whose boyfriend worked for the Hale Corporation. They had long since vanished into the glittering crowd, leaving Elara stranded by a marble column near the ballroom's edge. She stirred the ice in her untouched glass of sparkling cider, pretending to study the art hanging on the walls, when really she was just hiding from the swell of laughter and clinking glasses. The room reeked of polished perfume, ambition, and money. Women wore gowns that glittered like waterfalls of sequins. Men in sharp suits shook hands with smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Deals were whispered behind champagne flutes. Everyone had a purpose, a circle, a reason to belong. Everyone except her. Her gaze kept drifting to the windows, floor-to-ceiling glass that revealed the sprawling desert night. The city lights twinkled in the distance, but above them stretched an endless star-filled sky. She envied its freedom, its vastness, how it belonged nowhere and everywhere at once. On the other side of the ballroom, Lucien Hale was suffocating in his own kingdom. Tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored black suit, he was the host of this glittering chaos, yet he felt like a hunted man. Cameras flashed discreetly at the edges of the room. His business partners circled like hawks, their smiles sharpened by suspicion. For weeks, whispers had haunted his steps. Is Lucien married? Who is she? Tonight, they expected an answer. It was absurd. A man could run a multi-billion-dollar corporation, but without the facade of a respectable family image, partners grew nervous, investors wary, journalists ravenous. For Lucien, the question of his marriage had become more dangerous than any contract dispute. And the truth, he had none. No wife, no fiancée, not anymore. The woman who once promised forever had left him exposed years ago, selling her betrayal to the same press now shadowing his life. Since then, he had built walls higher than this mansion's ceilings. Business had become his armor, money his shield, solitude his only safe companion. But tonight, the armor felt paper thin. He had hours, maybe minutes, before someone cornered him. He could already hear the undertones of conversation. So where is she? Doesn't he know appearances matter? His jaw tightened as he scanned the room. Everywhere, familiar faces, hungry faces. He needed to breathe, to break free, but one wrong move would fan the fire. And then, just as panic brushed the edge of his composure, his eyes landed on her. Elara sat at a table tucked against the far wall, half hidden in shadows. She wasn't speaking to anyone. She wasn't vying for attention. She looked almost relieved to be overlooked. Something about her stillness in a storm of ambition pulled him like gravity. Lucien's pulse quickened. Not desire, not yet. Strategy. He needed someone who could pass unnoticed, someone who could wear the role without the world suspecting a script. And here she was. Plain black dress, dark hair swept into a simple twist, her glass untouched, her gaze wandering toward the stars instead of the people. Perfect. He cut across the room, his stride controlled, his expression unreadable. The crowd parted easily for him, though he barely noticed the murmurs that followed. As he reached her table, his shadow fell across her like a curtain lowering on a stage. Elara startled, blinking up at him. For a moment she thought he must have mistaken her for someone else. Men like him, magazine covers sharp, eyes like ice and shoulders that carried entire empires, did not speak to women like her. But then he leaned down, close enough for her to catch the faint scent of cedarwood and something darker beneath. His voice was low, urgent, stripped of charm. "Pretend you're mine before they destroy me," he whispered. His gaze flicked briefly at the crowd circling behind him. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The glass in her hand trembled. She searched his eyes for a hint of mockery, of some cruel game, but found only a tight desperation, a plea he couldn't speak out loud. And for the first time all evening, someone was looking at her. Really looking. If a stranger whispered such a desperate request to you in the middle of a party, would you agree or walk away? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your take.
For a heartbeat, Elara thought she'd misheard him. Pretend you're mine. The words still clung to the air between them, absurd and electrifying. Around them, laughter and music carried on as though nothing had shifted. Yet her world tilted, the ground beneath her trembling with possibility and danger. What? She stammered, her voice barely audible. Lucien didn't repeat himself. His gaze was steady, his jaw tight as if he were holding back the storm behind his composure. For a man who seemed to own the room, there was something fragile about the way his hand brushed the back of the empty chair beside her. Not commanding, not seductive, pleading. "Please," he said, softer now, "sit with me, play along, just for tonight." Elara's pulse thudded painfully in her ears. The stranger everyone else orbited, the untouchable Lucien Hale, was asking her to act like his wife, his partner, his chosen one. It made no sense, and yet the urgency in his tone burned away disbelief. Before she could respond, a group of sharply dressed men and women began weaving through the crowd toward him. Their eyes glinted like knives, hungry, expectant. Lucien stiffened, then pulled the chair beside her out with practiced grace, lowering himself as if he had always intended to sit there. The shift was seamless, almost choreographed. Suddenly, the richest man in the room was seated at her side. Gasps rippled from the tables nearby. Elara felt heat crawl up her neck. Lucien leaned closer, so close she could feel the warmth radiating from him. His smile, measured, effortless, was for the audience now, not for her. But his whisper grazed her ear again. "Just smile. Don't say much. Let them believe." And then the vultures descended. "Lucien!" boomed a man with slicked-back hair and a diamond tie-pin. "And this must be—" His words dangled, baiting. Lucien's hand found Elara's on the table. The contact jolted her, electricity shooting up her arm. His thumb brushed against her knuckles, a signal, a silent plea. "My wife," he said smoothly, voice rich with conviction. "Elara." Her breath caught. He had given her name to the fire before she had spoken a single word. The lie had taken root. The group's eyes flicked over her, scanning, measuring, cataloging. Some smiled too broadly, others narrowed their gaze, hunting for cracks in the performance. Elara felt their scrutiny burn her skin, but Lucien never flinched. His hand anchored hers in place as he fielded questions with polished charm. "How long have you two been married? Where did you meet? When will we see the ring?" Elara's throat closed. She tried to form answers, but every word shriveled before reaching her lips. Lucien filled the silence effortlessly, weaving threads of half-truths and elegant deflections. He told them they valued privacy. He hinted at years of quiet companionship. He redirected with charm so fluid it almost convinced her. Almost. Because beneath his veneer of control, Elara could feel it, the faint tremor in his palm, the tension in his shoulders. For all his power, he was holding on by threads. And somehow, impossibly, she was now part of his survival. As the questions grew sharper, Lucien leaned into the role. He touched her shoulder, tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear, his gestures tender enough to melt suspicion. Each touch branded her, leaving her reeling between reality and pretense. She wanted to pull away, to remind herself none of it was real, but the warmth of his hand on hers whispered otherwise. Finally, the vultures retreated with polite smiles, promises of meetings, and thinly veiled doubts. The storm had passed, for now. Lucien released her hand slowly, as if she might shatter. The smile drained from his face, leaving exhaustion in his place. "Thank you," he murmured, leaning back in his chair. His eyes, for the first time, softened, not the calculated mask of a businessman, but the naked gratitude of a man cornered. Elara swallowed, her mouth dry. "What happened?" He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "You saved me." Her heart hammered. Saved him? She had no idea how or why, but the words lodged deep inside her. And as the music swelled again, the realization struck her like a chord. This was no harmless request. Whatever she had agreed to, it had already begun weaving her into a lie, far larger than she could yet imagine.
Elara could still feel the phantom warmth of his hand on hers long after the last guest drifted away from their table. Her skin tingled as if branded, though she knew it was nothing more than a trick of adrenaline. It wasn't real. None of it was real. She should have pulled away, should have shaken her head and let him face whatever chaos he was running from. Instead, she had sat frozen, letting him claim her name, her hand, her presence, as though she belonged in his orbit. The music swelled again, violins rising above the low hum of conversation. Lucien was already standing, greeting another guest with the same calculated charm. His smile was perfect, his posture unshakable. Watching him, Elara wondered if he had rehearsed this 1,000 times in mirrors, learning to hide the cracks until no one dared look closer. But she had seen the tremor, the exhaustion, the desperation behind the mask, and she hated herself for caring. When Lucien finally returned to her side, she stiffened. "You can't just do that," she whispered sharply, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. His brows knit, though his voice stayed even. "Do what?" "Introduce me as your wife. Pretend I'm that. I don't even know you." He leaned closer, lowering his tone so only she could hear. "And no one else needs to know that. Just hold on with me. Tonight, that's all I'm asking." Her pulse jumped. "You're asking me to lie? To strangers? To your business partners?" "To vultures," he corrected, his voice hardening. "People who will tear apart every crack they find. They don't care who I am. They only care who they can make me out to be. Do you understand?" Her chest tightened. She did, more than she wanted to admit. She knew what it felt like to be picked apart by whispers, to have people dissect your worth without ever seeing you. She had lived her whole life in the shadow of comparisons. Her cousin, brighter, prettier, always chosen first. She knew invisibility could sometimes feel like survival. But this wasn't survival. This was theater. "Why me?" she asked finally, voice trembling. Lucien's gaze flicked to her, sharp but unreadable. "Because you weren't trying." The words stunned her. Everyone else in the room was vying for his attention, straining to be noticed. She was the only one looking away, and that, somehow, had made her visible to him. Her lips parted, but she couldn't form an answer. Before she could press him further, a flash burst from across the room. Paparazzi. A pair of photographers had slipped through the gates, cameras already aimed. Lucien swore under his breath and reached for her hand again, tugging her gently but firmly from her chair. "What are you—" "Come with me," he muttered. They cut through the crowd, dodging curious stares. Elara's heart raced, the echo of her heels sharp against marble floors. Every step felt like a step deeper into his world, one she had no business walking in. He guided her into a quieter hall lined with artwork, the noise of the party fading. When he finally stopped, releasing her hand, Elara exhaled shakily. "This is insane. I shouldn't be here." Lucien raked a hand through his hair, his composure slipping for the first time. "You think I want this? You think I enjoy dragging a stranger into the circus?" His eyes softened, regret flickering. "But if I don't play their game, everything I've built will collapse, and they know it." Elara wrapped her arms around herself, trying to shield against the weight of his words. "Then find someone else, someone who actually belongs here." His gaze lingered on her, steady, almost piercing. "You belonged the moment you sat alone and didn't care who noticed." The sincerity in his tone disarmed her. She shook her head, retreating into the only defense she had left: denial. "I can't do this. I won't." Lucian straightened, mask sliding back into place. "Then leave," he said, though his voice carried something brittle beneath the steel. Elara froze. She wanted to. She wanted to grab her bag, slip out the side door, and pretend none of this had ever touched her. But as she turned toward the exit, flashes erupted again at the end of the hall. The photographers had found them. Lucian's jaw clenched. Elara's heart lurched. Resistance was no longer an option.
The flashes came faster, blinding in the dim hall. Lucian's hand closed around Elara's once more, his grip firm but not cruel, pulling her toward a side door before the photographers could crowd in. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His urgency bled through every step. The door swung open into the cool Arizona night, the desert air sweeping in sharp and dry, a welcome shock against Elara's flushed skin. They emerged onto a terrace draped in fairy lights, the distant hum of traffic mixing with the whisper of crickets. But even here they weren't alone. Two of Lucian's partners leaned against the railing, cigars glowing like embers in the dark. Their eyes widened at the sight of him and her. "Lucian," one of them drawled, exhaling smoke. "And Mrs. Hale." The title hit Elara like a blow. Her cheeks burned, but Lucian didn't flinch. His arm slid naturally around her waist, his touch light yet anchoring. He smiled with the kind of ease that could convince anyone he had nothing to hide. "Yes," he said smoothly, "we needed some air. Crowds can be suffocating." The men chuckled knowingly, launching into questions about business, travel, the future. Elara said nothing, terrified her voice might betray her. She let Lucian guide the rhythm, his charm steady, his deflections graceful. And yet, every time his thumb brushed against her hip through the fabric of her dress, she felt her defenses cracking. They finally excused themselves, the terrace door closing behind them. Silence settled, broken only by Elara's uneven breath. "You're good at this," Lucian said quietly. She turned to him, incredulous. "Good at what? Lying?" His smile faltered. "Surviving." The word hung heavy between them. For the first time, Elara saw beyond his tailored perfection, the exhaustion in his eyes, the shadows of a man who had built an empire not out of joy, but out of necessity. A shiver ran through her, though the night was warm. She wanted to tell him she wasn't strong, that she was no savior. But his gaze on her, steady, unyielding, made her wonder if he saw something in her she had never believed was there. A voice called from inside the hall. More guests, more questions. Lucian sighed, his hand still resting lightly against her side. "We can't leave separately now. They'll follow. They'll sniff out the truth." His tone softened, almost pleading. "Stay, just for tonight." Elara's chest tightened. She should walk away. She should vanish into the night and let him face the wolves alone. But her feet refused to move, because deep down, some hidden part of her, the part that had always longed to be seen, to be chosen, was terrified that if she walked away, no one would ever look at her like this again. If you were Elara, trapped in a lie but suddenly needed, suddenly chosen, would you keep playing along or would you run? Share your thoughts below. The ballroom had thinned. The music had softened into something slower, more intimate. Yet Elara remained by Lucian's side, tethered by circumstance as much as by choice. Every time she thought she might slip away, another guest intercepted them. Another curious glance pinned them together like moths beneath glass. Eventually, Lucien steered her into a quieter lounge beyond the main hall. The lights here were dim, the voices distant. A grand piano stood silent in the corner, and a fire crackled low in the hearth. The world outside felt far away. He poured them both a drink, sliding the glass toward her. She shook her head. "I don't drink." He paused, then set his own glass down untouched. For the first time, he looked less like a man in control and more like a man caught in the act of remembering something painful. "You think I enjoy this," he said finally, his voice low. "The charade, the pretending." Elara studied him. "Don't you?" His jaw tightened. "Once, maybe. Years ago, when I thought charm could solve anything, when I thought love could shield me from the world." His eyes flickered with a shadow. "She proved me wrong." Elara didn't ask who she was. She didn't have to. The bitterness in his voice, the stiffness in his shoulders told enough. "She sold you out," Elara said softly, almost surprised at her own bluntness. Lucien's eyes snapped to hers, sharp, startled. For a moment, she thought he might deny it, but then he let out a low, humorless laugh. "Not just me. My secrets, my company, my life. She gave the press everything they needed to dismantle me. And they would have, if I hadn't built something stronger from the ashes." His hand clenched on the armrest, the faint tremor betraying the composure he clung to. "Since then, I've kept everyone at arm's length. Safer that way." Elara's chest ached. She knew the language of betrayal too well. "My father left when I was 12, she said quietly, surprising herself. The words spilled out before she could stop them. "He said he was going on a trip, and he never came back. My mother, she remarried within a year. My stepfather and cousins always made me feel like an afterthought, like I was furniture in someone else's home." I swallowed hard. After a while, I stopped expecting to be chosen. Silence stretched, fragile and heavy. Lucien turned toward her, his expression no longer polished but raw. "That's why you sit in corners, why you shrink from notice." Her throat tightened. "And that's why you hide behind your empire." The firelight flickered across his face, highlighting the crack in his armor. For the first time, Elara felt the distance between them narrow, not because of the lie they were living, but because of the truths they had just spoken aloud. She wrapped her arms around herself, wishing she hadn't said so much, wishing she didn't feel so exposed. But Lucien didn't mock her. He didn't dismiss her. He simply sat in silence, his gaze steady, as if her confession had weight, as if it mattered. And in that moment, the pretense shifted. They were no longer strangers playing roles. They were two broken people, laid bare by circumstance, tethered not by lies, but by wounds that mirrored one another. Elara looked away, heart pounding. She had promised herself not to feel this, not to want this, but something in her already feared that leaving him would hurt more than staying. And something in him already feared that letting her go would mean returning to the emptiness he had built his empire to escape.
The fire in the lounge had burned low, casting shadows that flickered gently across the room. Hours had slipped away unnoticed, the clamor of the party reduced to a distant hum. Elara sat curled into the corner of the sofa, her shoes abandoned on the rug, her bare feet tucked beneath her. Across from her, Lucien had undone the first 2 buttons of his shirt, his tie draped carelessly over the armrest. For the first time all evening, He didn't look like a man hosting a kingdom. He looked human. It should have been awkward, the silence between them, but it wasn't. He leaned back, studying her. "You're not like them." Elara raised a brow. "Them?" "The ones who come to parties like this with smiles sharp enough to cut glass. The ones who treat people like cards in a deck, waiting to be played." She gave a faint laugh. "I don't exactly belong at parties like this." "Maybe that's the point," he murmured. She sipped from the water glass he'd poured earlier, tracing the rim with her finger. "You make it sound like an advantage." His lips curved faintly. "It is. You don't have to perform. You don't have to pretend you're someone you're not." Elara tilted her head, amused. "Says the man who asked me to pretend I'm his wife." That drew the first real laugh from him, a low, warm sound that broke through the heaviness. The way his eyes softened when he laughed sent a strange ache through her chest. "You're right," he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "I've built a life on performance, and yet here I am, asking a stranger to help me keep the act alive." "Not just a stranger," she corrected, her voice gentler than she expected. "The girl sitting alone in the corner. You could have picked anyone." His gaze lingered on her. "That's exactly why I picked you." Her breath caught. The air between them shifted, thick with something unspoken. She looked away, desperate to break the tension. "So, what happens now? Tomorrow the press prints pictures of us, your partners think they've met Mrs. Hale, and I go back to whatever I was before tonight?" Lucian was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Do you want that?" The question lodged in her chest. Did she? Part of her craved the safety of slipping back into invisibility, of convincing herself none of this had mattered, but another part, the part that had always ached to be seen, was terrified of returning to the shadows. She swallowed hard, unable to answer. To her relief, Lucian didn't push. Instead, he shifted closer on the sofa, careful not to startle her. He reached for the blanket draped over the armrest and handed it to her without a word. She hesitated, then accepted it, pulling it across her lap. The small act of kindness struck deeper than any grand gesture could have. "You're cold," he said, simply. "And you notice too much," she replied, though her voice carried no bite. He smiled faintly. For a moment it felt like the weight of their lies, their scars, their expectations, all melted into the crackle of firelight and the comfort of simply existing side by side. Her head tilted back against the sofa, exhaustion catching up to her. She hadn't realized how heavy the night had been until now. Lucian watched her, his expression unreadable, but softer than before. "You should sleep," he murmured. "And you?" she asked drowsily. "I'll keep watch," he said, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Her lips curved in the faintest smile before her eyes slipped shut, and as she drifted into uneasy rest, she felt, for the first time in years, that she wasn't entirely alone. Lucian leaned back, the firelight painting his face in shades of gold and shadow. He knew this was temporary. He knew tomorrow would bring scrutiny, questions, the storm he had fought so hard to keep at bay. But tonight, with Elara asleep beside him, the empire could wait. For the first time, he let the silence feel like peace.
Morning light streamed through the tall windows of Lucian's study, catching the polished glass and steel with a cold gleam. The party had ended hours ago, the last guests escorted out by his staff. Silence wrapped the mansion now, heavy and brittle. Elara stood barefoot on the marble floor, her shoes dangling loosely from one hand. She had woken on the sofa in the lounge, disoriented, only to find Lucian gone. A sliver of unease had pushed her to search for him, following faint voices down the hall.
Now, hidden just beyond the doorframe, she froze. Inside, Lucian stood with two of his senior partners, their voices hushed but sharp. Papers littered the desk, contracts spread like battle plans. "She seems convincing enough," one partner said, his tone cautious. Lucian's reply was clipped, detached. "She'll do for now. They'll believe it. That's all that matters." Elara's heart lurched. Do for now. The words sliced through her like glass. She's a cover, a convenient prop until the deal is finalized. Once that happens, this entire charade disappears. Her stomach twisted. She wanted to step into the room, to demand an explanation, to believe there was more beneath his words. But the look in his eyes, sharp, calculating, void of the warmth she had glimpsed last night, rooted her in place. A prop. The word echoed, louder than the crackle of the fire had been, louder than his laugh, louder than the way his hand had brushed hers with tenderness. Everything she thought she had felt, every spark of connection, reduced to nothing more than performance. Her throat closed. She stumbled back from the door before he or his partners could see her. By the time Lucian emerged from the study an hour later, the hallway was empty. Elara packed quickly. Her cousin's car keys were still on the foyer table. She grabbed them with trembling hands, her bag slung carelessly over her shoulder. Her chest burned, her vision blurred, but she forced herself forward. She had to leave before he could find her, before he could spin another lie to keep her tethered. Lucian came down the stairs just in time to see her hand on the front door. "Elara!" She spun to face him, her eyes wet, her voice shaking with fury she barely recognized as her own. Don't say a word. I heard you." He froze. "Heard what?" "Everything," she spat. "That I'm just a cover, a convenient stranger to make you look good." Her voice cracked, but she pressed on. "Do you have any idea how cruel that is, to ask me to stand beside you, to open up to you, to—" Her breath hitched. "And all the while I was nothing more than a prop?" His eyes widened, a flicker of pain crossing his face. "Elara, it's not." "No!" She cut him off, the force of her voice startling even herself. "Don't twist this. Don't make me believe I imagined it. I saw you, Lucian. I thought you saw me too." For once, he had no polished answer, no charm, no mask, just silence. Her chest heaved. She shook her head, blinking away tears. "You asked me to pretend. Fine, I'll stop pretending now." And with that, she pulled open the door and stepped into the blinding Arizona sun, leaving him standing in the hollow silence of his own house. Lucian's hand dropped uselessly to his side. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of emptiness not as protection, but as punishment. Have you ever trusted someone only to find out you were just being used? How did you handle it? And would you have walked away like Elara or stayed to demand the truth?
The desert sun burned high above Glendale, yet Elara felt nothing but cold as she drove aimlessly through unfamiliar streets. Her cousin's car rattled over the asphalt, but she barely noticed, her knuckles white against the steering wheel. Every block blurred into another, her chest tight with the echo of Lucian's words. A cover, a prop. She'll do for now. The longer she drove, the more those words dug in, shredding the fragile bond she had dared to believe was real. She had spent her life being overlooked, cast aside, left behind, and now she had been foolish enough to think she'd finally been chosen. She pulled into an empty lot outside a shuttered diner and turned off the engine. The silence was suffocating. She pressed her forehead to the steering wheel, tears spilling unchecked. "I was nothing," she whispered to the empty car. "Nothing again."
Across town, Lucian stood at the window of his study, staring out at the manicured lawns he barely saw. The contracts were signed, his partners appeased, the charade secured. For now. On paper, he had everything he had fought for. And yet, the victory felt hollow. Elara's voice haunted him. "I thought you saw me too." He had built his life on shields, contracts, charm, distance. He had told himself that walls were safety. But last night, sitting by the fire, listening to her bare her scars, he had felt something shift. For the first time in years, the silence between him and another human being had felt like peace. And now, she was gone. He closed his eyes, pressing his palms against the cool glass. He had driven her away with his own cowardice, with words spoken not from truth, but from fear. He had let his partners hear what they expected, that she was a convenient illusion. He had let the lie devour the fragile truth he had begun to want. But he couldn't silence the ache in his chest. He couldn't silence the memory of how her laughter had cracked through his armor, or how her confession had mirrored his own pain. For the first time in years, Lucian Hale was afraid. Not of losing a deal, not of headlines, but of losing someone who had seen him. Elara sat in the car until the tears dried to salt on her cheeks. Slowly, she forced herself upright, her breathing unsteady but determined. She couldn't stay here, trapped in circles of grief. She had promised herself long ago never to beg for love, never to cling where she wasn't wanted. If Lucian saw her as nothing more than a tool, then she had to walk away. And yet, the memory of his hand over hers, the way his voice had softened when he said she wasn't like the others, the way he had draped the blanket across her lap, it haunted her. There had been truth in those moments. There had been something more than performance. Her heart warred with her mind, both pulling in opposite directions. "Leave," it urged. "Save yourself." But another voice whispered, "What if you're wrong? What if for once someone meant it?" Elara gripped the steering wheel tightly, as though her own hands could anchor her against the storm. She had a choice. She could vanish back into the shadows, safe but unseen, or she could risk everything, her pride, her fear, her heart, and demand an answer from the man who had broken her. Lucian turned from the window, his reflection fractured in the glass. He knew what he had to do. For once, he couldn't let pride dictate his silence. He grabbed his keys, ignoring the half-finished contracts on his desk, and strode out of the house. Because for the first time, the empire could wait.
The neon sign of the old diner flickered to life as dusk settled over Glendale. Elara still sat in the parked car, unable to will herself to drive farther. She had convinced herself she was leaving, but something in her had anchored here, as if waiting for a reason not to disappear. Headlights cut across the lot. She stiffened as a sleek black car pulled in beside her, the engine humming low before shutting off. Her breath caught when Lucian stepped out. He looked nothing like the polished figure of last night. His shirt was untucked, his hair disheveled, his eyes heavy with something raw, desperation. "Elara," he called, his voice breaking on her name. She gripped the steering wheel, torn between slamming the car into gear and staying frozen. He approached slowly, careful, as if she were a wounded animal that might bolt. "Please," he said, stopping just outside her door. "Don't run." She turned toward him, her face streaked with dried tears. "Why shouldn't I? You made it perfectly clear I was just a prop." His expression crumpled. "No, that's not what you were. That's not what you are." Her laugh was brittle. "I heard you, Lucian. I heard every word." He dropped to a crouch so he was eye level with her through the open window. His voice lowered, thick with regret. "Yes, you heard me say what they needed to hear.
I let fear dictate my words. I let the walls I built speak for me, but none of it was the truth. She shook her head, her chest tight. Then what is the truth? His gaze locked on hers, unwavering. That last night was the first time in years I felt human. That when you looked at me, you didn't see the headlines or the empire. You saw me. And I saw you, not a stranger, not a cover. You, Elara. His voice cracked. And I can't lose that. Not again. Her throat ached, her defenses splintering under the weight of his words. And if I stay, what happens when the deal is done, when the partners stop watching? Do I just disappear from your story? He reached through the window, his hand trembling as it hovered over hers. His breath caught. Relief washed across his face like a storm breaking. Lucian opened the car door and gently helped her out. The desert breeze swept around them as they stood in the dim glow of the diner lights. The world narrowed to just the two of them. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Elara whispered, "You asked me to pretend like I was yours. What if I can't stop pretending anymore?" His smile was soft, pained, but real. Then don't. He cupped her face in his hands, and she let herself lean into him, her tears spilling freely as his lips pressed against hers, not with the urgency of a man cornered, but with the reverence of someone finally home. The deal, the empire, the press, none of it mattered in that moment. All that mattered was that two broken people had found each other, not in the glittering lies of a ballroom, but in the fragile truth of their own scars. And for once, neither of them had to hide. If someone you loved had hurt you with words spoken out of fear, would you give them a second chance like Elara did, or would you walk away for good? Share your thoughts below.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you loved this story, you will definitely love the next one. It's more intriguing than you can ever imagine. So go ahead and watch it now. Click on the image on your screen right away to watch the next one. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. It helps and encourages us to share the best human interest stories you'd love.